Welcome to all.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself and to say why I have any credibility on this subject. My name is Carol Shafto. I am a nationally certified planner through the American Institute of Certified Planners, and I spent 38 years in my career as a planner. And a lot of that was working with the census and census data. I managed the affiliate for this region of Michigan and beginning in 1980. So I worked on the census in 80, 90, 2000, 2010, and I retired in 2018. So I missed the current one. And today I'm going to be talking a lot about trend data. So I'm going to be looking at the past and where we're at today so that you can see how we got here. I think it gives you a better picture than if I were to just focus on one particular year. I frequently get the question, why am I so negative? And I want to say that if I'm appear negative, it's the data that's negative. I'm really a Pollyanna. And so when I say Alpena County lost population, which it did, I love Alpena. I'm not being mean. I'm just going to give you the facts. So I wanted to clear that up, first of all, because it's a question I get every time I do this presentation. Today I'm going to be working mostly with census data, but I also have data from the Mackinac Center on migration and from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services on births and deaths. And so the data is not apples to apples. It's not even apples to oranges. It's more like apples and broccoli. They just won't add up if you were to add up all the different periods, all the different sources, whether or not it was asked directly or if it was projected or estimated. So I say that so that if there's a mistake, you can't find it because I buried it by saying that it's from a different source. That's not true. I'm a smart aleck. So anyway, this is more of a guide, more of a big picture than it is specifics. And you always want to remember that figures lie and liars figure, and I'm a liar because I figure. So this isn't slanted to any point of view or made to prove a certain point. I'm just going to be basically presenting data. I've noticed in the paper the last, probably 2 or 3 weeks that there's been several different articles on census data. And so I know there's an interest, and that's partly because we had a decennial census in 2020, which hasn't been released yet. A little bit of background about the census. It's been around since 1790, and it only required initially that they gathered how many people there were. And that was so they could determine how many seats there would be in the House of Representatives and how many electoral college delegates there would be. And that's still true. It's constitutionally mandated that we have the census, but it doesn't have to ask all the things that it asks. You may remember the old days of the census when there was a short form and a long form, and you all hoped you'd get the short form. They don't have that anymore. Now, what the census has in place of that is called the American Community Survey, and that comes out, that's gathered every year, and they gather that from 250,000 households in the United States, and they extrapolate that all the way down to the local level from those projections. So you can see how that could go awry with that kind of, that few of participants representing so much data. And the other issue today is that the 2020 census data not having been released, I'm relying on 2019 American Community Survey representative data. So those are all technical things that you need to know if you're going to be using this for some specific purpose. The census drives a lot of important decisions. It guides how $1.5 trillion in federal money is distributed in healthcare and schools and human services, et cetera. So it's utilized in that way. A lot of market decisions are based on the census. Where would you want to put a supermarket? You'd want to look at hub data and say, where the population is that might, attend either the supermarket or a restaurant. So there's a lot of decisions that are made based on this data. So that's kind of a little background on the census. And I want to move into actually looking at the data now. If you'd put up that first slide deck. And I'm going to be looking down because I can't read that little print on that screen so far away. So this first screen is the population. And I'm working with 12 counties of Northeast Michigan, and all of them are up so that if you wanted to look at how your particular county stacks up against others, that it's there for you. I'm going to be concentrating mostly on Alpena County because that's what most of, I think, the audience is concerned about. And I'll try to compare that to Michigan and the United States. So in this first slide, you'll see the population for the region from 1970 until 2019. And I've looked at a percentage of change over that period of time. And that's how I came up with the changing face of Northeast Michigan. And there, over that period of time, that 50 years, there are 2 counties and only 2 who have lost population. And here I go with the negativity. The main one is Alpena County lost 7.4% of its population in that period of time. About 2,500 people. And the other county that lost was Presqu'île, lost 2%. If you look at just what happened in the last 10 years since the last census, all of the counties in the region lost population except for Otsego. And I'm going to be talking about Otsego a lot because it is the county that's growing. And for your reference, Otsego is Gaylord. So when I need to, in case you're not as familiar with counties as I am, I will orient you by saying, that Presqu'île is Rogers City, Onaway, Posen, so that you know what I'm referring to. So over the past 10 years, as I said, we have lost population except it for 2% in the Otsego area. Overall, in the last 50 years, we have lost 66,000 people in this 12-county region, which is 70% of the overall population. I'm sorry, can I go back and say, oops, I just did. It's been a 70% gain in population overall, and we've gained 66,000 people. We went from 152,000 to 218,000 people in that 50 years. So in the long haul, there's been a gain. In the short run, there's been a loss. So what we need to be looking at, of course, always is how do we turn that around? And I will look at that. You can put the next slide up, please. This is what I was just referring to in a bar graph. The largest county in the region is Alpena County, and that's the top bar. And I'm using here 2010 data because that's what I have, that's hard information. But the pattern for 2019 is very similar. So there hasn't been any really changes in this pattern. Alpena is the largest of the counties, down to Oscoda being the smallest. Oscoda County is not Oscoda the town. That's an Iosco. That's a frequent confusion. Oscoda County is Mayo, Fairview, Cummins, that area. So that is the smallest county. And in 2019, which I do have here in front of me, they had 8,200 people, and Alpena County, the largest, had 28,405. So that's the range, high to low. And I want to be answering the question that we put in the promo, which county is largest but growing the slowest? So we just revealed half of the answer. Alpena is the largest county. And if you'll put up the next slide, the next slide will show that pattern of change over these several decades. And you will see now Alpena went from the top to the very bottom, because although it's the largest, it's not only growing the slowest, it's growing the wrong way of that axis bar. So in that period of time that this bar graph was drawn, Alpena had lost 3.6% of the population. Now it's up to 7.4 over the 4 or 5 decades. So Alpena is losing population at the same time that Gaylord, the Otsego area, is really growing. In that same bar graph here, you can see Roscommon grew the fastest or the most in that period of time, 147%. Otsego, right behind them, grew 131% over that period of time. And I extrapolated out the data, and we hope this doesn't happen, here, not being negative Nelly, but if Alpena were to continue the same pattern and were to lose about 4% per decade, and Gaylord were to continue to grow at the pace they're growing, they would be about equal in 20 years. And I think that's not new data. I think if you go to Gaylord and see all the hustle and bustle, that you would recognize that that's certainly a growing area, in large part due to its centrality in the state and the fact that the freeway goes through. There's a lot of reasons which I don't have time to go into, but suffice it to say that it is gaining rapidly and is the most rapid gainer in the region. We'll go to the next slide. The next question that I want to talk about, and I talk about it in depth, I'll try to not be as in depth as I often am, is the switch or the change, the shift from an younger population to an older one. And I love this line graph because it's so simple, but this X really shows in bright detail what has happened over these last 40 or 50 years. In the beginning, it shows that 37% of the population were under 18. and 17% were over 60. As time went on, the line for the under 18 goes down, 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 and the line for over 60 goes up, up, up until they intersected there in about 1992, in that time frame, at which point there was about 25% roughly of the population in each of those age groupings. And that trend line, unfortunately, has continued into not only 2010 that is up, but in 2020 that we're now entering into. You can do the next slide. The next slide shows that that decline in the under age 18 population isn't just local, it's a state and a national trend, but the decline line is much sharper for the region than as the state and nation, but it's the same general pattern. So overall, we are losing the kids. We're not losing the kids, they're still around somewhere, they just got old. But there are many factors, which I will get into, that affect that under 18 population. But I now have this for 2019, and at that point, there are now only 17% of our general population under 18, and 21% for Michigan, 22% for the United States. But so we've gone from, 37% to 17% in 50 years. So that's been a huge decline in the region. I'll take the next slide. And I think a simple way to illustrate that is here in Alpena County, we used to have 12 elementary schools. We now have 6. So they have closed Long Rapids, Sunset, Gordon, Bingham, Hubbard Lake, and Maple Ridge over that period of time. And that means fewer teachers, fewer bus runs, more consolidation, less of that school building being the center of the community. We all know that schools are more than just kids learning. Schools have been a real central point that communities have rallied around for a very long time. And looking at how many actual number, not just percent, but number of young people have been, has declined. You can see on that bottom line, excuse me, I'm a little hoarse today. Don't make any jokes about ponies. The bottom line there shows that over that period of time, we have 17,000, almost 18,000 fewer people under 18. And here in Alpena County, that has gone from, in 1970, we had 12,000 kids in school. Now we have 7. So that's a decline of 57%, more than half of the kids that were here in 1970. Also during that time, we lost the Catholic Central High School, which some of us barely remember. So there's a couple of anomalies I want to point out in case you actually print out some of this data. If you look at Oscoda County, which is about in the middle of the pack there, and again, Oscoda is the Tawases, Oscoda, which you think of as the town, which is Oscoda Township, and Whittemore, Hale, that's Oscoda. You will see that there has been a major change we'll see it better on the next slide, which I'll get to in a minute, but I can point it out here. The anomaly that happens is the closure of Wirt Smith Air Force Base. When Wirt Smith closed in 1993, not only did all the airmen who were basically a young age grouping, not only did they leave, but also they had young families and they all left. So I pulled out the detail slide that had when that happened and how rapidly that declined. But where you see that Iosco lost 34% of their kids, a lot of it had to do with that one aberration in the data. And so it's not exactly as though they had as much natural change as the other areas. I'll take the next slide, please. Oh, you're one ahead of me or I'm one behind you. Is there one in? Nope. Okay. I see what I did. That's fine. I have that detail in front of me and I didn't put it on the slide. Thank you. All right. So I've sort of beat the point to death that we have fewer kids. And now I'm going to do the opposite and talk about how many older people we have. And I did that first with median age. The life expectancy isn't a real big factor in this, although the life expectancy since 1970 has gone up. In 1970, life expectancy for women was 77, and for men it was 70. We're gentler on ourselves, I think. Or else you take good care of us, one or the other, I don't know. But anyway, in 2019, the life expectancy has gone up, and it's now 78 for women, and 69 for men. So it's dipped a little bit, and it dipped, unfortunately, in 2020 because of COVID. And so again, that's going to show up in the trend lines for the future, and it's an anomaly. Without COVID, we wouldn't have had that decline in the life expectancy in the last in the last year. If I say anything wrong that's different than the slide, trust the slide because they're right. And sometimes when I'm talking, I might say something dumb. You never know. I'm giving myself an out here. This is another slide that really talks about that anomaly of Wirt Smith that I was mentioning a few minutes ago. If you look at the median age, it's just, to me, it's astounding. Alpena County, and Richard's from Alpena County. Alpena County's median age is 58. And median means half of the population is older than that, and half of the population is younger. So when you think that 58 is approaching, well, you get something from AARP, that's for sure. When that starts when you're about 50. But at 58, you kind of think of you're starting to get old, and that's the median. That's where, gives you a really good picture. And Alpena County is Harrisville, Lincoln, Hubbard Lake. So that is the oldest county in the region. And there are several others that are right behind it. Roscommon's 56. But look at Otsego, if you can. Otsego is 42. And that really shows that disparity between the youth and the elderly population. And of course, Otsego, Gaylord area, is the youngest. And even though Otsego is the youngest county in the region, it's still older than Michigan, which median age is 39, is 38 for the nation. So we've really changed a lot in that 50 years. That column all the way to the right is how much older in years we are at the median than we were in 1970. And so if we look at Alpena County, for example, the median age is 46. It was 24. So we're 21 years median age older than we were 50 years ago. And what does that affect? You know, when you start thinking about all the things that you market, all of the housing that we have, all of those huge homes that are on the market because we have small families now, all of the things that happen when the population ages. And I do have a note there that the greatest change in that period of time does show as Iosco with the 28 years older than it was. And that you can see very clearly. If you look at 1990 for Iosco, the median age was 32. 10 years later, it was 44. And that's why it was important to point out that anomaly. They didn't just all of a sudden age that much. That was that withdrawal of the population because of the the withdrawal of Wurtsmith. So if you look at that median age, it really gives you a simple and quick picture of how we've changed. Now I've got some detail. I'll take the next slide, please. The detail, which is pretty hard for you to read, I would expect. So I'll just give you some of the highlights. And then if you do at some point want a copy of the presentation, and I can answer other questions for you privately at another time. But this is the population over 60, and it is for 2010. I don't have it for 2019 because they don't release the age details in the American Community Survey. And as I said, 2020 isn't ready. Excuse me. But in 1970, 17% of the population was over 60. That was 1 in 6 was over 60. In 2010, when it was 25%, as I pointed out earlier, that's 1 in 4. So you really can see that shift in the population. And during that same period of time, I'm really fighting this horse, I'm sorry. The general population grew by 72,000 people. So we went for all the population together from 151,000 to 224. So we gained 72,000 people, but we gained 43,000 in elderly. So an awful lot of the gain or the increase in population is all accounted for in that 60 plus age group. And that group grew by 268% in that period of time. So that shift is really impacting a number of things. I'll take that next slide, please. That pattern, though, that shift to elderly, again, is not just here. This shows you the pattern for those decades from 1970 to 2010. And the one on the far left that is the United States, and you see it getting older and older. In the middle is Michigan. It's getting older. In the region, which is on the far right, you can see that the pattern's the same, but the bar is much steeper. So it's aging quicker, although it's a similar pattern than we have in Michigan and in the United States. I'll take the next slide, please, Dick. Our clicker isn't working. So I can go click, click, but that doesn't work. One of the things that's really affected is voting. So if you look at we just were looking at the number of people who are over 60, but now I want to look at taking out those people who are under 18 who cannot vote. They're not old enough. And the people who are over 60 and see how that impacts voting. And so we factor out the young people. And then there's an intangible that you can't put a number to, but we know it from looking at patterns of who votes. The people from age 18 to 30 are not high participants in the process. They came out in droves in the 2020 presidential election, which is the highest they've ever come out in. But in general, they are not really participating in the process. In the 2016 presidential election, 71% of the people over 65 voted, and only 45% of the younger group voted. So that's a real disparity in power at the polls. And that happened again, even with a lesser degree in 2020, where the older group was 68% and the younger grew by 55%, or grew to 55%. So if we could keep those young people engaged in, I don't know if we have to rile them up like we did this time, I hope not, but whatever it takes to get more participants in the polls would give us a much more representative government than we have. Because right now, if you look at the data that I presented here, let's just take the top one because it's easiest to read. Alpena County, 48.5% of the voting age population is over 60. And then again, if you take out the people who tend not to vote, that pushes that up even higher. And that means that it's possible, if everyone in that age group voted, that the people who are 60 and older could control the outcomes of elections, and they do have a huge impact on it. So what kind of things would you naturally expect would pass with an elderly population? I'll tell you, number one, ambulance issues. You know, everybody who's old wants to know that if they call 911, the ambulance is going to take them to the hospital. So if you're looking for an ambulance ballot issue, you probably got it made. Do they vote for schools? A lot of people think not. I think they're wrong. It's my opinion, my show, my opinion. But just because people are older doesn't mean they won't vote for a school election. They might not vote for the bells and whistles. We tend to like reading, writing, and arithmetic. But, you know, they know the school's the heart of the community. They know that provides jobs. They know that their grandchildren go to school. And so you don't want to jump to the conclusion that older people do not support schools, because that's just not true. I'll take that next slide, Dick. This is just another a stack bar that shows, again, the same thing I was just discussing, and that's that the power of the elderly on the voting. So we can move on from that. The next thing that I want to talk about is, in the promo for this, the question was, are there really more obituaries than birth announcements? And you know the answer. Yes, indeed you do. Partly, I was told birth announcements aren't in the paper because they don't want to give a young person's birth date because of stealing data in the future. I don't know how true that is, but I was told that. But if you look at the data, it's overwhelming, the difference between births and deaths, and that's called vital events or vital statistics. And that's the is shown here. And let's look at Alpena, which is the second line down. And the population in 2010 was 29,598. It dropped in 2019 to 28,405. And so there was a change there, a 4% loss, about 1,100 people. How is that accounted for? If you look at go further to the right now, if you look at births in Alpena, there were 2,645 births. There was 3,700, I'm sorry, that would have been a real tragedy. 3,737 deaths for a net loss of 1,092. You can see there that almost all of that loss was natural change, was the difference between deaths and births. Overall, bottom line, and the total on the very bottom, literal bottom line, in this 10 years, from 2010 to 2019, there are 12,000 fewer people in the region just based on how many more people died than were born. Now, it doesn't take me to tell you why, in part, that's happening, because I've been harping on we're elderly, and the birth rate among the elderly is extremely low. We just don't reproduce. So when you have a population that's skewed so highly to elderly, it makes sense that you're going to see the obituaries more than the birth announcements, or if you look at the statistics, that you will see that kind of change. And even Gaylord had 61, or Otsego County had 61 more deaths than births. But some of these counties, like Roscommon, next to the bottom line, they had 2,300 more deaths than births. So that is certainly a real factor in what's happening here. And when you have that kind of a loss and you want to build the region, we want to grow. Now, if we can't reproduce, the only thing left is migration. So what can mitigate that is more people moving in than move out. Unfortunately, negative Nelly, if you look at the net migration pattern for that 10 years on the far right, you'll see that Alpena also lost 1% more people going out than came in. So we have to do a much better job at telling people how wonderful it is to live here if we're going to offset these the vital events. And if possible, we want to say, move here and bring all your kids and get young people moving and really talk about all the advantages of being here. And I will show you one huge advantage here in a few minutes. But the only thing that makes up population statistics are births, deaths, and migration. That's it. And so that's where our challenge lies. And as long as we have such an elderly population. I'll take the next slide, Dick. This next slide, again, it's a similar message. Excuse me a moment. Similar message, and this is persons per household. And partly, obviously, when we have fewer young families, we have fewer households that have multiple members. I live alone. I'm one of the problems, but you knew that before we started. But in 1970, the average person per household in this region was 3.19 people. Now it's 2.23. So we've lost a whole person per household. And there are 98,000 households, or 98,000 occupied housing units, which are households in the region. And if we only had that same person per household as we had in 1970, we would all of a sudden have 98,000 more people. That's a third of our population. So this person per household really summarizes sort of all I've been talking about, but it's lower birth rates, not just that that old people don't have babies. That's a really lame joke. But that the people who are having children are not having 8 children, 97 of 8. If you have 4 kids, you go, wow, that's a big family. 2 children are more the norm. We don't see those big families anymore. So we have lower birth rates. We have that shift to the non-childbearing population. We have low net migration, which I just talked about. And we have a lot of people living alone. A lot of people are outliving their spouses, and a lot of young people are choosing not to marry as early. And so we have a lot of one-person households. That really affects housing stock. And I raised my sons in a big house, and I sold it a couple of years ago. Our housing stock is often built for those larger families, and now they've been broken up into 3 or 4 apartments in a building and converted into other kinds of units, just because it's hard to sell a big house because, there's just not a need for it. So I'll leave that. The next slide, please. The next thing I want to talk about is population distribution. This is density, and this is one of the glories of living up north, and so I threw that in there. We really do have a lot of wide open spaces. Even Alpena County, the largest, which is the densest, of course, has a density, that's people per square mile, of 51. So there's 51 people per square mile in Alpena County, down to Oscoda, which I told you before is the smallest county, has only 15 people per square mile. And a square mile is 644 acres. So if you think an acre is a large lot size, which it is, you can get 5 lots on an acre. But if you think an acre is a big lot, and there's 644 of those in a square mile, you can see that if you wanted to move to Oscoda County, you wouldn't necessarily ever have to see your neighbors. And a lot of people like that. Oscoda County is very interesting. I don't have time to tell you all the interesting things I know, but Oscoda County does not have one incorporated place, not one. Mayo, which is the county seat, is not a real town. Don't tell the people in Mayo that, they might get mad. Mayo is divided right down the center by M33. On one side of the street in Mayo is Big Creek Township. On the other side is Mentor, and they have to work together to make anything work in Mayo. Fairview is not incorporated. It's not a city or a village. Cummins, nope. Mayo, nope. There's not one incorporated place in Oscoda County. That's your tidbit for the day. And just in case you wanted something to talk about at the bar tonight, you can tell them that, I said. And you can prove it with this slide. Next one, please. This is nothing too news to you, nothing to brag about. It's just the facts. We are not, excuse me, a racially diverse region at all. The bottom line here, literal bottom line, 98% of the population of the region are white. The largest minority population are American Indians, and they concentrate for the most part in Sheboygan County, which is Sheboygan, Mackinac, that area. And Aranac County, Standish, there's a reservation there. And so we have 98% white, 1% American Indian, and then the balance are broken into the other 1%. So about a third of 1% are Black, a third of 1% are Asian, and then the rest are made up of a number of multiple races, but the majority of that is Hawaiian Islanders. And we're talking about 1 or 2 people per county. I mean, it's very, very small. And then in Hispanics, Hispanic is not a race. Hispanic is an ethnic grouping. And so Hispanics can be any race. So there's Black Hispanics, white Hispanics, et cetera. And we only have 1% of our population in the region being Hispanic. And Michigan isn't a high percentage of Hispanics either. 4.4% of Michigan is Hispanic. In the United States, 18%. You'll find the Hispanics are in the desert Southwest, Arizona, Texas, California, such. I'll take the next slide. The next thing I really want to talk about is occupancy and vacancy characteristics, because frankly, I find it interesting. And I asked the question in the promo, why doesn't Alpena have a huge summer population like some of the other counties? And I will be able to explain that to you by using these statistics. On the far left of the screen, it shows how many total housing units we have, which is 171,000. And 98% of those are occupied. So that leaves 73,000. Did I say 98%? I think I did. 98,000. So let me say that over again. 171,000 housing units. 98,000 of those are occupied, which leaves 73,000 vacant units. If you conjure up in your mind what that would look like, that is a huge percentage of the housing that's not occupied. Of the occupied housing, most of it's occupied by the owner, 83%. We're not a high rental area. Only 17% of the housing is occupied by renters. But that 73,000 vacant units does not mean that every other house is empty and somebody's trying to rent it or somebody's trying to buy it, because 61,000 of those, 84% of the vacancy, is something called held. And I'll take that next slide deck. Those units are held for seasonal, recreational, or occasional use. They're not for sale. They're not for rent. They are 2 categories of housing. On the lakes, the big lake, Lake Huron, and the interior lakes, Those are cottages, summer cottages. In the interior areas like Montmorency County, that's Atlanta, Hillman, Oscoda County that we've talked about, there's hunting camps and hunting cabins. So when you look at that, when you look at how many of those homes are held for occasional use, you can see that some things can happen here. Let me use an example. Well, let's use the highest and the lowest. Oscoda County has the highest amount of units held for occasional use, 51%, more than half of their vacant housing, of their total housing, not their vacant housing, more than half of the total housing in Oscoda County is held as occasional use, recreational uses. Pop down to the bottom to Alpena, it's 12%. So in one place, more than half of the housing is seasonal. And then in Alpena, it's only 12%. Now, what that can impact is summer population. You're not going to see that huge influx of summer people here like you see in Alpena County, where 47% of the housing is recreational. We do see a bit of a change. We complain that we have to wait for 2 whole traffic lights, but it's not that huge change that we have in some of the counties. And the other thing that it impacts, other than summer people, is the potential for increases in year-round housing, because a lot of times people will convert their occasional housing into a permanent housing, a permanent home. So they'll say, let's sell our house in the city, and we'll take the profit that we have from our equity, and we'll put that into the cottage, and we'll move up north, and we'll have our housing free and clear. So when there's a lot of housing available, there's a lot of potential for conversion, a lot of potential for those summer people. And the reverse is in Alpena County, where very little of that is held for occasional use. I could get into, briefly say one of the major factors, because you want to know why, and I don't have time to tell you why. One of the major factors is that the Lake Huron shoreline of Alpena County is inaccessible. There are no roads that get you to an awful lot of the property in northern Alpena County on the Big Lake. So that is a major thing to look at. And I'll take that next slide because it just pounds this point home. You see here, again, the same thing, and it's here represented in the bar graph. You see Alpena at the bottom, Oscoda, Montmorency, Alcona at the top. And we still have more than the state of Michigan has, because we're still a tourist area here, but nothing like some of the other counties surrounding us. I want to take just a few minutes to change tune from population. The next thing is the median housing values. And I said a few minutes ago that I would say one of the big attractions to moving here is this, affordable housing. And it's decent affordable housing. We don't have slums. Even our poorest housing is pretty darn good, as the saying goes, my saying. But the highest median value, again, at Seago, Gaylord area, the median housing value is $139,500. That means, again, median, half is more, half is less, all the way down to Oscoda County, where it's $90,000. Alpena County's median value is 96,500. So half of our housing, if it were to be, it's about not necessarily its sale price, but its valuation is more than 96.5 and half is less. So that's the range from 139 down to 90. But if you look at Michigan, the median value is $154,000. The United States is $217,000. So you can buy a really, really, really nice house here for what a somewhat mediocre house might be elsewhere. And I wish I had brought the Traverse City statistics so I could rag on Traverse City for a bit. Because we in Alpena love to talk about Traverse City, but the housing in Traverse City is very, very expensive. I think that's a plus, that's a win for our area. We can say, hey, y'all, if it's too expensive for you to live on the west side of the state, we've got a big lake too. We've got lots of inland lakes. We've got affordable housing. Come on over. And I think that that is a huge selling point for this region, is that we have a lot of available decent housing. We won't talk about jobs. That's not even on the program today. I'll take the next slide, please. I want to look at income quickly. The median household income, I keep preaching that median's half above, half below, but I want to mention that. The median household income ranges from Otsego being the wealthiest with 54,000 as the median household income, down to Ogama. Ogama is West Branch area, Rose City, that area, at 40. And Alpena County's median income is 43,000. If you compare that to Michigan, Michigan has $57,000 as a median income, which means that we have about 13,000 fewer dollars less per household than the average for Michigan in Alpena County. So we really don't have the high incomes. We don't have a lot of the high paying jobs and things here that produces those high incomes. I'll take the next slide, please. This is per capita income. Per capita income is based on all of the income for the region compared, or of an area, any area, compared to how many people live there. So here you take all of the income, and income is earned income, interest, dividends, government transfer payments like Social Security. All of that is income. And you divide all the income by how many people live here, and that gives you a person per household. I mean, that dollar amount here is per person. So it makes it easier than to talk about household income, because that you don't know how many people are in the household. But this is per person. So here, the highest, Presqu'île, yay out for you. Presqu'île is Rogers City, Onaway, Posen, Millersburg, all the hot spots of the region. I'm from Onaway, so I get to say that. Is the highest with 28,000 per capita, and that ranges down to 23,000 in Ogama. The average for the region is 25,600. So if you live alone, that's the average. If you're two in the household, you double it, etc. And in the United States, it's 64,000, which is way more than double what we have. But we always say we're the richest nation in the world. So I had to throw on here, just for kicks, that we're 7th in per capita income in the world, and we're behind Luxembourg, Norway, Sweden, Ireland. Even Ireland has more money. Iceland, and Qatar have all more income than the United States. But that's the per capita income average. If you something that you often need the per capita income and the household income for grant writing. We don't use family income because in order to use family income, the persons have to be related by birth, marriage, or adoption. So that's why we don't use that. Next slide, please. The poverty statistics show that, as you know, we're not a high income area. This is by the greatest poverty to the least. The greatest poverty is in Ogama, the West Branch area, 18% of their total population below the poverty level. The federally established poverty level, which is somewhere around $12,000 for one person. I didn't check that, but it's in that range. And Alpena County's poverty level is 13.9. Child poverty, however, is much lower. Much higher. Child poverty is in the 25, 26, 27% of kids in the region are below the poverty level. So the regional average for child poverty is 27.4%. That's a little over 1 in 4 children in the region living below the poverty level, which is appalling, truthfully. And for all ages, it's 14%, and that is higher than it is in Michigan and in the United States. I have just a couple more slides, and I know I'm running tight on time, and I told Dick I could talk about this for an hour or a week, but I want to throw up a couple of other things. Dick, if you'll give that next. This is just the amount of households with computers and internet. This has been in the paper lately also. It shows that in the region, that about a quarter of the households don't have internet access. So when they say, go on the internet and sign up for your COVID shot, well, 25% of the households can't go on the internet or don't have internet to go on. And then there's the people that have it, like me, who don't necessarily know how to use it, like me sometimes. I'm not a techie. But anyway, this shows how many housing units do not have computers and how many of those do not have internet access. It's quite surprising, actually. I was thinking with Alpena being the largest county that we would fare better here, but only 84% of our households have computers and 76% have the internet. And it's higher in Gaylord and Grayling area. And I don't know enough about it to conjecture, but I'm thinking that might have something to do with that centrality and maybe the lines run along the freeway. I don't know. But anyway, that's something that I know that there's interest in, the computer thing. This is the number or the percent of persons under 65 without health insurance. They don't include 65 and older because of Medicare, but this shows just how many or what percent of our population in that age group do not have access to health insurance, because again, this is something that is often asked for in grants. And overall, we're worse than the Michigan average, except for Montmorency, which is much worse. But we're better than the nation as a whole. The nation as a whole, 9.5% do not have health insurance, and we're better than that. But if you need that health insurance data for any of the grants you might be looking at, then you have it. The last two slides I just have, and in case you need to know it for yourself or something that you're working on. This is the population and the percent of change of all the cities and villages, the incorporated places in the region, and CDPs. CDPs are census designated places. They aren't real places, like I said, and that includes Osanique. Sorry, Osanique, you're not real. You were designated to be a census place by me, actually, in 1990, so that we could get data out for your region. Otherwise, you were just part of Alpena County. So there are a few census designated places, but that gives you the population of all of the cities and villages in the region over the past 10 years, and almost all of them show losses. So if you want to know what your specific town looks like, it's on this slide. And the last slide, if you'll put that up, and then I'll wrap up and try to answer questions if there are any. I just like this. I just think this is so fun. This is the city of Alpena, and some of you may know I was the mayor, so I love Alpena statistics. But if you look at 1900, which is the first line in Alpena, the city of Alpena in 1900 had 11,802 people. So almost 12,000 people in 1900. And then if you go down, you get to 1990, 2000, guess what? It's almost exactly the same. So in 100 years, we went up, up, up until we reached the high of 14, almost 15,000 in 1960. And then we took a nosedive right back to where we were when we started. So I just find that an interesting little tidbit, that this is a city that has the same population now as 100 years ago. And with that little factoid, I will finish up. And that, that's about an hour and 5. That's the most amazing time that I can put in on this presentation. So I appreciate your interest. If you're still there, if you're not, I don't blame you. And if I can answer any questions either now or in the future, I did want to mention quickly that I did publish some data handbooks, because my mission at one point was to make sure that this region got data. Now you can get it on the internet, but in the olden days, it was only in books like this one from 1960. This is how the population came out. And if you didn't have the book, you didn't know anything about the statistics. That's how we got into the statistic business at Northeast Michigan Community Service, where I worked, because we couldn't get data. So we said, aha, if we become a census affiliate, the data will come to us. We had the onus on us to then represent it to the public, which I did in some of these published books. But now it's available to anyone, and you can find out if I lied by just Googling any of this information.
Thank you, Carol. There's a question that came in over chat. Are savings and investments counted in income data for the region? So, the
Yes.
retiree assets and so forth?
Yes, because interest and dividends count as income.
Dividends, savings and
Yes,
investments.
Savings income counts. I've got a little, I made some notes in case you ask questions that I didn't want to just, it includes earned income, wages, salaries, and self-employment, interest, that would be from savings, dividends, incomes from estates and trusts, government transfer payments, which are Social Security, public assistance and welfare, and disability. That's what's included in income. What's not included is the value of health care. insurance payments, food stamps, capital gains, tax refunds, and medical care. But everything else is counted as
Well,
income.
It doesn't sound like what would be classified as wealth is included. You know, if the amount of your savings statement or the amount of your stocks you own, that type of thing, it's only income generated by those, I think you're saying.
Right. The value doesn't count, just the income from that. So just the interest and not the asset itself.
We have other questions for Carol, just unmute yourself or add them into chat. We're monitoring that also.
If I don't know the answer, I will make it up.
Carol, Don Newport.
Hi, Don. This is your fault. You fingered me for this presentation.
And you've done a wonderful job. Hey, you were a policy maker for the city and area. As you look ahead, a decade or so, what changes do you see having to be made given the demographics and the changes that are occurring?
Well, I think that we have, that's such a tough question, Don. I mean, and you know it is, and I don't think there's a policymaker anywhere in an area that's declining that doesn't have that kind of a question. I think we don't do a good enough job at promoting the things that we have here. When I was mayor or when I was the head of the municipal league, I brought groups in all the time, and every single time they went, oh my goodness, I had no idea Alpena had all these things. You have this, you have this. We don't do a good job at saying, what do we have that's so attractive? I'll tell you, we have a regional medical center. Which is incredibly important if you're looking for a place to live. You have to have a hospital. We have good schools. We have a community college. We have, jobs are an issue. We have to find ways to increase the employment picture. But, if we would somehow be able to say, look at all the things we do have. I have a son who moved here a couple of years ago. His wife's a doctor at the hospital and he's the therapist, and they moved up here. And he bought this, he said, I bought a house that we couldn't begin to afford. They had a little bitty house that sold for twice as much as they bought a very nice house on Long Lake for. So if we were to start, I don't know, Don, that's the only thing I can really say is we undersell ourselves tremendously. And I don't know a good way, truthfully, right off to say how we do that better. But I know, again, that everybody who comes here just has a jaw-dropping moment of it's beautiful. It's, a place where I predict, this is my personal prediction, that we will grow. We're going to grow when Traverse City's full. We're going to grow when the places like New Orleans is underwater. I think we have a potential for tremendous growth and change in the future. I don't think it's going to be in my lifetime, or you're in my age group, yours. But, that's kind of what I think on that.
Carol?
Yeah.
This is Mary Ann.
I recognize your voice. Hi, Mary Ann.
Hi. The other piece that I wonder about in the short term, I think you are absolutely right. And of course, we've agreed on that for a long time. But the short-term effects of working from home, I think is going to affect Alpena as well. I think that people will realize that if they can continue their jobs in a house that they can afford, we're going to see an influx. Of course, that's only if we have houses available for them. And I think that the housing issue is going to be another issue that Alpena will have to face.
That's a good point. So what I understand you saying is from people working at home, people have recognized in a greater way that it doesn't matter where they live. So why not live up north where the housing is inexpensive and you can snowmobile out the back door and you can be 5 minutes from the beach if you're going to work from home anyway. Is that your point, Marianne?
That's the point. The issue, of course, is having access to internet. So I don't think, depending on how that grows, how internet access grows, it won't necessarily be equal across the region.
Right.
But it certainly will affect, I think, the city and the surrounds of Alpena itself.
Well, and the other thing that the statistics don't necessarily show in that internet access issue is that's how many households have internet.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily say they didn't have access to it. So they might have had access and just not wanted to pay for it if they thought they weren't going to need it. So that's a little bit deceptive in the data, but I know that broadband internet access has been an issue that's been worked on here. And I think that we can have to continue to do better on.
I agree. And there are, I know, for example, in Presque County, there are areas that it's very difficult to get internet access.
Or phone service.
Or cell phone service.
Right,
Correct.
right.
And those are going to affect population growth in this area.
So then, so if we want the areas that have good access should, when they're promoting themselves, say, and by the way, we have cell phone access, we have internet access, and all their other things. Come on up.
Right. I agree.
Good point.
Yep.
Thank you.
Welcome. It was fun to go through the statistics with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, internet access is really a key. I know living on Hubbard Lake, there's part of the lake that doesn't have good cable-driven internet access, although now we have a big cell tower so people can use their cell phone hotspots and so forth. But there's a lot of areas that, even though they're listed as capable, are really not capable from a modern perspective of trying to do your work.
Right.
But obviously, having cable is almost a requirement if you're having good internet access is a requirement for people doing work from home.
That's absolutely true.
It adds to the value of your house if you have it.
Yep. Any other questions?
Well, Jodine's giving a plug for all. Thank you, Jodine. That is, lifelong learning associations are recognized as bringing positive aspects to communities also. Anybody else have questions for Carol?
And if anyone needs copies of the data, we'll find a way to make that available to you.
Just send an email to all@alpenacc.edu and we'll get you a copy.
And if there's any mistakes, Dick made them. And he didn't actually. He was incredibly helpful. But, I doubt I produced this much data without an error. So if you find one, feel free to point it out and I'll fix it. But for the most part, I'm pretty picky about making sure data is accurate. So thank you for your time and interest.
Well, if we Googled it, we'd be able to confirm it, right?
That's right. Yeah, but then I'll say, yeah, you Googled a different source that I was quoting.
Yeah, I know. Anyone else with questions for Carol?